June 1942. Deep inside a roaring factory in Detroit, sparks fly like fireworks. The floor trembles with the weight of steel, and time itself has become an enemy. A giant clock hangs over the assembly line, ticking down from 300 hours to just 10. That was the challenge: to build a tank faster than anyone thought humanly possible. The Germans had their Tigers and Panthers, masterpieces of engineering, but slow, expensive, and delicate. The Allies needed something different. A tank that could be built by the thousands, repaired in the field, and roll off the line in less than half a day. Engineers, machinists, and draftsmen worked like men possessed. Ford, Chrysler, and the American Locomotive Company joined forces, transforming peacetime industry into a wartime miracle. This wasn't just about designing a tank. It was about redesigning how to build one. And in the thunder of Detroit's factories, amid molten sparks and grinding gears, a revolution was born. The M4 Sherman, the tank that could be built in 10 hours instead of 300, and still win a world war. The year before, in 1941, America was not ready for war. The U.S. Army's tank fleet was outdated: thin armor, weak guns, unreliable engines. Meanwhile, German Panzers rolled across Europe like iron waves. When engineers at the Ordnance Department began designing a new tank, their goals were clear. It had to be reliable, powerful, and above all, fast to build. The M3 Lee was their testbed, bulky, with a strange side-mounted gun, but it gave them a foundation. From its lessons came the M4 Sherman, named after General William Tecumseh Sherman, the relentless Civil War commander. Instead of exotic alloys or intricate mechanisms, the Sherman was designed for simplicity. Every bolt, plate, and bearing could be built in multiple factories, interchangeable, standardized, and cheap. It wasn't the strongest or the fastest, but it was the most adaptable. That was the real genius. The tank wasn't just engineered for battle, but engineered for mass production. Henry Ford had already changed the world once with the automobile. Now his son Edsel Ford was about to do it again, this time with tanks. In 1942, the U.S. government approached Ford with a challenge: build an entire bomber factory, and mass-produce tanks at a rate the world had never seen. Ford responded with a bold idea: apply the moving automobile assembly line to armored warfare. At the Detroit Tank Arsenal, workers operated around the clock. Instead of craftsmen taking months to hand-build one tank, Ford's engineers broke the process into hundreds of tiny, repeatable steps. Steel plates moved down conveyor lines, welders followed blue chalk marks like surgeons, and cranes dropped engines into place in minutes. Each worker became a part of a living machine, one that turned raw metal into a Sherman tank in less than 10 hours. The first prototype rolled off the line in early 1942. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. And soon the line began producing at full capacity, one tank every 49 minutes. What had taken the Germans weeks to complete, Ford's men could finish between breakfast and dinner. The Sherman wasn't built to dominate in a one-on-one duel. It was built to outlast. Engineers made deliberate trade-offs: medium armor for speed, a dependable Continental R975 radial engine for mobility, and a versatile 75mm gun that could engage both infantry and light armor. But what really mattered was its standardization. Every component, from treads to turret, could be swapped between tanks built in different states. Mechanics could strip one Sherman for parts and repair another on the spot. That interchangeability made the Sherman more than a weapon. It was a system. It allowed the Allies to keep their armored divisions rolling through Africa, Italy, and France while the enemy's vehicles sat broken in repair yards. And when the tankers took their seats, they didn't see a masterpiece of steel. They saw something human, dependable, sturdy, and strangely familiar, like a Ford truck built for war. By 1943, America's industrial might was at full throttle. Every minute, somewhere in the United States, another Sherman rolled off the line. Women replaced men on the factory floors, learning to weld, rivet, and assemble gearboxes with precision that rivaled any engineer. Rosie the Riveter wasn't just a symbol. She was real, sweating beneath a welding mask, hands blackened, heart proud. The sound inside the factories was deafening. Drills, presses, and forklifts echoing like thunder. Shift whistles marked time in a world that no longer slept. Each Sherman was built, tested, and shipped in record speed. Flatbed rail cars carried them east to the docks, where Liberty ships waited to ferry them across the Atlantic. By the end of 1943, the U.S. had produced over 25,000 Shermans. It wasn't just output. It was the rhythm of a nation's determination. Every tank carried with it the spirit of the people who built it. The final breakthrough came when Chrysler's engineers fine-tuned Ford's process. Using modular assembly, prefabricating entire sections of the tank, they could bolt and weld them together like giant puzzle pieces. 12 men, one crane, and a mountain of precision timing. That's all it took. From bare chassis to fully armored vehicle, the Sherman could now be assembled in just 10 hours. It was more than engineering. It was choreography. Every motion calculated, every spark synchronized. The results spoke for themselves. By war's end, nearly 50,000 Shermans had been built. They fought in every theater, from the sands of North Africa to the snow of Belgium. The Sherman wasn't invincible, but it was always there. Reliable, fixable, replaceable. And in war, presence often means victory. In the summer of 1942, the first Shermans rolled out for testing in the scorching deserts of California. Engineers and soldiers stood side by side, clipboards in hand, dust swirling around the tank tracks. The sun glinted off the armor as the machine rumbled forward, belching smoke and confidence. Every clank and vibration told a story, of parts that fit together perfectly, of gears meshing with mathematical precision. The Sherman could reach 25 miles per hour across sand and gravel, climb steep ridges, and keep moving where others stalled. It was not elegant, but it was relentless. One officer wrote, "It's like a bulldog on tracks, stubborn, dependable, never backing down." The testing phase also revealed the Sherman's key advantage: reliability. Tanks are worthless if they can't move, and while German Panzers often broke down in the field, the Sherman just kept going. Its parts were easy to replace, and its mechanics didn't need special tools or training. When the final test ended, the message was clear. America's engineers had built not a perfect tank, but the right one. Behind every Sherman stood an army of engineers, draftsmen, and industrial planners. They didn't carry rifles. Their weapons were pencils, slide rules, and blueprints. The Ordnance Department had one rule: build smart, build fast. That meant rethinking every stage of production. Instead of designing tanks in isolation, engineers worked directly with factory managers, logistics officers, and even shipping experts. They created a modular blueprint. Each section of the Sherman could be built in a different factory and later bolted together like a giant Meccano set. Turrets from Ohio, hulls from Michigan, engines from Wisconsin, all meeting perfectly on the assembly line. It was an engineering ballet that required flawless coordination. Even a half-inch error could stall production across the country. To make this possible, engineers standardized everything, from bolt sizes to gear teeth. By 1943, over 1,000 companies were contributing parts to Sherman tanks, all working from the same technical language. It was this synchronization, not just machinery, that made 10-hour assembly a reality. The Sherman was the first tank truly designed like an automobile. Ford and Chrysler engineers approached the design the same way they would a family sedan, with efficiency, repairability, and mass production in mind. The interior was surprisingly simple: a gasoline engine that could be swapped in hours, a transmission built like a truck's, and wiring looms that could be plugged in like a car radio. Everything was designed for speed, not just on the battlefield but on the factory floor. Each step of assembly was broken down into timed tasks. A team installed the treads in 17 minutes. Another fitted the turret in under 10. The tank's main gun, once the work of expert machinists, was now installed using hydraulic arms and pre-drilled mounting rings. Chrysler's Detroit arsenal became the epicenter of this revolution. Engineers installed moving cranes that carried the tanks along like cars in a dealership, passing through inspection stations and paint booths. By the time a Sherman left the line, it had been touched by over 2,000 hands, each trained to perfection, each a cog in a machine that never stopped moving. Beneath the roar of machinery, it was people who made the miracle real. At the arsenal, workers came from every corner of America: farmers, mechanics, housewives, and students. Many had never seen a tank before. Yet in weeks they were building them faster than anyone thought possible. Women formed nearly half the workforce. They learned to weld armor plates thicker than anything they'd ever touched, to calibrate instruments with surgeon-like care, and to drive forklifts through narrow aisles of steel. Each worker had a photo pinned to their locker, a son in uniform, a husband overseas, a brother in the Pacific. They weren't just building tanks. They were building protection. Shift changes felt like military maneuvers. Whistles blew, cranes moved, sparks fell like golden rain. By midnight, another Sherman rolled off the line, ready to be crated and shipped. One worker wrote in her diary, "We never saw the front, but every tank we built was one less boy who had to die without armor." That was the heartbeat of America's war machine. Human, determined, unstoppable. Building tanks was one thing. Getting them where they were needed was another. Each Sherman weighed nearly 30 tons. To move them across America, engineers devised a vast logistical web. Rail cars were refitted with reinforced frames. Convoys carried engines and turrets across highways, and ports worked around the clock to load the finished tanks onto Liberty ships. Inside every crate was precision, a machine born from hundreds of suppliers, ready to roar into battle thousands of miles away. The U.S. Army's Transportation Corps mapped the movement of every Sherman as carefully as a general planned a campaign. From Detroit to New York, from Los Angeles to San Francisco, trains rolled in endless chains, their cargo covered in canvas and secrecy. By 1944, one Sherman left an American factory every 12 minutes. On docks from Liverpool to Calcutta, they were unloaded, fueled, and sent straight into combat. It was an industrial ballet across continents, where the front line was fed not by bullets alone, but by the genius of organization. When those Shermans finally reached the front, they brought with them the soul of the people who built them. In North Africa, British crews nicknamed them Ronsons because they lit up fast, but they soon learned to love their reliability. In Italy, they climbed mountains where no German tank could follow. In France, they rolled through the hedgerows after D-Day, engines roaring like an American anthem. Every time a Sherman broke down, it could be fixed in hours. Crews scavenged parts from wrecks, swapped engines, and welded armor plates using spare metal. The tank was designed for it, field serviceable, the engineers called it, and it mattered. When General Patton's Third Army raced across Europe, it was the Sherman that kept up. He once said, "Give me enough Shermans and I'll drive to Berlin." Each tank bore the fingerprints of its makers, a hidden testament to the hands that built America's steel soldiers. In record time, June 1944, the beaches of Normandy thundered under the weight of invasion. Among the landing craft, rows of Sherman tanks rolled down steel ramps into the surf. Engines howled. Water surged around them. For many, it was the first test of everything American industry had promised. The Sherman was not invincible. Its armor could be pierced by German 88s, its guns sometimes outmatched by Tigers and Panthers. But its advantage was numbers, speed, and reliability. When one tank was destroyed, two more filled its place. Crews trusted it because they understood it. The manuals were written in plain English. Spare parts were universal. A broken track could be fixed with a wrench and an hour's effort. Soldiers often said, "You fight a war with what you can build, not with what you dream." The Sherman wasn't a dream. It was a reality, one that rolled across France like a steel tide. Behind every tank's rumble was the echo of factories back home, still turning day and night, still building faster than the enemy could destroy. Combat taught engineers as much as blueprints ever could. Reports from the front flooded Detroit and Washington. Need thicker armor. Gun needs more punch. Better traction in mud. Instead of waiting months, engineers responded within weeks. The modular design meant upgrades could be slotted in without halting production. New turrets, improved engines, wider treads, all incorporated while the lines kept running. This agility was unheard of in war production. German factories, trapped under Allied bombing and bureaucratic rigidity, couldn't adapt at the same pace. America's factories became living organisms, learning, evolving, responding. By 1945, over 49,000 Shermans had been produced. Not because they were perfect, but because the system itself was. The design philosophy, make it simple, make it scalable, had turned into a doctrine that would define modern engineering forever. Each tank was an embodiment of America's flexibility, proof that speed, standardization, and smart design could outfight even the fiercest enemy. While the Shermans fought, another miracle unfolded, a logistics chain stretching from America to every corner of the globe. Engineers designed crates that could fit disassembled tanks like puzzle pieces inside Liberty ships. Once they reached foreign ports, soldiers and mechanics reassembled them using the same 10-hour techniques learned in Detroit. A tank built in Michigan could be fighting in Burma weeks later. Manuals written in plain language allowed British, Soviet, and Free French crews to operate and repair the same tank seamlessly. The Sherman became a universal machine, not just an American one. It crossed cultures, languages, and terrains, from the snow of the Ardennes to the deserts of Egypt. In Soviet hands, it was the MK, to the French, Char M4. But to every soldier who rode inside, it was more than steel. It was survival. The American system of modular production had created not just a tank, but a global symbol of industrial cooperation. The Sherman's design held both triumphs and tragedy. It was fast, mobile, and dependable, but not invincible. Crews faced terrifying odds against the German Panthers, whose shells could pierce a Sherman at 2,000 yards. Yet the Sherman's strength wasn't in armor. It was in its availability. When one was destroyed, another replaced it within days. When the Germans lost a Panther, it took weeks to repair or rebuild. Veterans later said, the Sherman wasn't the best tank in the war. It was the best tank for the war. That distinction mattered. Its design allowed the Allies to sustain momentum, to keep pressing forward without logistical collapse. Its assembly line origins made war mobile again, fluid, relentless, unstoppable. And at the center of it all were the unsung heroes, the engineers and machinists who worked in silence. Their victory measured not in medals but in minutes saved on the assembly line. By 1945, America's industrial landscape had transformed beyond recognition. What once built cars, tractors, and home appliances now produced tanks, aircraft, and ships at an unimaginable scale. President Roosevelt had called the U.S. war the great arsenal of democracy. The Sherman was its shining proof. Every bolt tightened in Detroit, every weld done in Toledo, every turret turned in Cleveland, all fed a single cause, freedom. When the war ended, those same factories turned back to peace. Workers returned home, but the knowledge remained, the understanding that organization, standardization, and teamwork could achieve the impossible. The Sherman story was more than a tale of metal and machinery. It was the story of people who believed speed and precision could save lives, of engineers who fought their war with blueprints instead of bullets. It was proof that sometimes victory isn't forged in battlefield, it's born in factories. May 1945. The guns of Europe fell silent. Across the ruined cities, the clatter of tanks faded into the hum of rebuilding. Thousands of Sherman tanks, once the lifeblood of the front lines, now stood idle, symbols of a war that had demanded everything from industry and imagination. Yet, even as the soldiers went home, engineers didn't rest. They studied every shell hole, every broken gear, every battlefield report. The Sherman had not only won battles, and it had taught lessons. Lessons about how to design for reliability, how to simplify complexity, how to make machines that worked under chaos. In that silence after victory, the engineers realized something profound. The methods that built a tank in 10 hours could rebuild a world in peace. When the assembly lines stopped churning out tanks, they didn't stop creating. The same plants that once shaped steel for war now stamped out automobiles, tractors, and construction equipment. Ford's Willow Run, once home to bombers and tank parts, began producing peacetime vehicles. The precision techniques honed during the war revolutionized consumer goods. Refrigerators, washing machines, and cars all benefited from military efficiency. In every tool there was an echo of the Sherman: modular design, interchangeable parts, and standardization. Engineers who once built for destruction now built for living. The war had proven something vital. Mass production could be a force not only for victory, but for prosperity. The Sherman's influence didn't stop at America's borders. Nations that received them under Lend-Lease, Britain, France, the Soviet Union, learned from its design philosophy. Soviet engineers, long accustomed to rugged simplicity, admired its maintainability. British designers studied its layout for future Centurion models. Even Germany in the post-war years adopted American-inspired assembly techniques during its reconstruction. The 10-hour tank had become more than a military marvel. It was a model of how speed and quality could coexist. In Japan, industrialists studied U.S. production methods as part of their rebuilding process, lessons that would help give birth to Toyota's lean manufacturing decades later. Thus, the Sherman didn't just fight a war. It quietly helped design the future of global industry. Behind the blueprints in steel were faces: engineers, foremen, secretaries, welders, and riveters. Some had never seen a battlefield. Yet each shift they pulled, each tank they helped complete, saved lives across oceans. There were stories of workers pinning photographs of soldiers, brothers, sons' husbands onto their machines for inspiration. Women who had never handled tools before became experts in precision assembly. They wore scarves, gloves, and goggles, but underneath was the same fierce determination as any soldier. They didn't carry rifles. They carried wrenches, and in that way they fought too. Their legacy wasn't only victory, it was the belief that ordinary people, united in purpose, could create miracles of metal and time. The Sherman's creation became a case study in the art of solving the impossible. Design teams faced constant contradictions: make it lighter but tougher, faster but safer, simple but sophisticated. They overcame every constraint with creative engineering: welded hulls instead of riveted ones, standardized engines that fit multiple models, and simplified turret rings that could be installed by semi-skilled labor. Every change shaved off minutes, every redesign reduced cost. Eventually, a process that once took 300 hours became 10. It wasn't magic. It was method. A disciplined belief that with enough iteration, even the most complex challenge could be mastered. That principle, now known as continuous improvement, remains at the heart of modern industry. The Sherman's modular approach didn't only change engineering. It changed strategy. Generals realized they could plan offensives around predictable logistics. Fuel, spare parts, and ammunition were standardized across thousands of vehicles. This allowed supply lines to flow like clockwork, a logistical ballet that gave the Allies momentum the Axis couldn't match. A single factory in Michigan could support an army in Normandy. A ship leaving New Jersey could supply a division in Italy within weeks. It wasn't just about tanks. It was about synchronization. The Sherman taught the modern military that war was not only won by bravery, but by systems thinking. Decades later, many of those old tanks lie rusting in fields or standing proudly in memorials. Their engines long cold, but their story alive. For those who built them, the Sherman was never just a weapon. It was a promise that human ingenuity could rise above chaos. Its sound was more than metal clanging. It was the heartbeat of a nation that refused to give up. Every bolt tightened, every weld finished, every gear tested, all carried a whisper of hope from a continent fighting for its survival. The Sherman became not just a tank, but a symbol of American resilience, and a reminder that even in darkness, creation can be an act of defiance. Today, the principles that built the Sherman live in every modern assembly line. From automotive plants to spacecraft factories, the DNA of the 10-hour tank remains: modularity, standardization, speed, and teamwork. It stands as a monument to what people can do when united by purpose. The Sherman story isn't about war, it's about transformation. About how a nation's engineers, workers, and dreamers turned steel into strategy, and time into triumph. And when historians look back at the Second World War, they'll see that victory wasn't just won by soldiers in the field, but by those who, with grease-stained hands and sleepless nights, built the machines that made victory possible. The Sherman tank, born of necessity, built with genius and remembered as a triumph of human will.